We now bring in James Trusty, a former Justice Department official who served under both Bush and Obama administrations. Take me through what happened today. How unusual is it for a Deputy Attorney General in the middle of an investigation like this to publicly come out and do a press conference about indictments?
Well, I'm not sure it's that unusual because each of these indictments is in kind of a separate silo. Manafort and Gates is one chapter. What's happened with the 13 Russians and 3 entities today looks like an entirely distinct chapter. Same prosecutors, maybe the same agents, but a pretty different chapter in a bigger book about Russian activity.
What happens in Russia today? Obviously, these are people that are not in the United States. What sort of impact does it have? And would the Justice Department ever hope to have these Russians extradited to the United States for prosecution?
Yeah, that's kind of the sad postscript already. This indictment is dated today, and that tells me that since it wasn't under seal for a period of time, there was really no serious effort or belief that they were going to take any of these people into custody. So they unsealed this indictment today knowing that there's 13 people probably sitting pretty in St. Petersburg, Russia, that are not going to face extradition under the relationship that we have with that country.
I was following some of the hot takes right after the press conference, or even during, with people from the far right and the far left saying this means Trump should be really worried, and it also means that Trump should think that this is over and there's nothing more to see here. Where do you see it?
Yeah, well, in between. I mean, the good news for Trump is it's an indictment that very much goes out of its way to say that Trump campaign officials, to the extent they were contacted, were unwitting. And that's a very intentional placement of that word in the indictment, to say that they're not co-conspirators, they weren't colluding. But to act like that bangs the gong and ends all the Russia probe is a bit premature. There's no way of knowing whether there are other cases to follow, but at least today's news is not necessarily bad for President Trump. It looks more like the Russians were kind of equal opportunity disruptors.
There was reporting this morning that Mike Flynn, who has pled guilty, is possibly being encouraged to change that plea and withdraw it based on something that a judge said this week. Can you explain that?
Well, Mike Flynn is in a difficult spot because even if he's thinking about withdrawing his guilty plea, it's not as simple as just notifying the court. It's actually a very uphill struggle for a defendant to convince a court after having pled guilty that there should be some reconsideration of that. He's been cooperating in the probe. That much is very clear. And so this would be a real abrupt about-face. And it's not by any means automatic if you pursue it. In fact, most of the time, it's almost an automatic no to withdrawing the plea.
Andy McCarthy over at National Review wrote today that it certainly appears that Sullivan's order supersedes the plea agreement and imposes on the special counsel the obligation to reveal any and all evidence suggesting that Flynn is innocent of the charge to which he has admitted guilt. Is he right on that?
Well, he's right, but incomplete. I mean, he's very knowledgeable. He says a lot of very good things about the criminal justice system. So I like following him. But the reality is Judge Sullivan, at least since the Stevens case, where Senator Stevens' indictment and conviction were overturned, has had a standing discovery order that he imposes on the parties. Our firm has a case with this right now where the prosecution is obliged to turn over exculpatory information even after a guilty plea. That shouldn't be anything new to most prosecutors. They realize if there's evidence of innocence, they have to turn it over. So
we have other probes that are going on the Hill. There is the House and Senate Intelligence Committees doing investigations. You have the oversight investigations. And then you have the Mueller probe. One of the things I'm wondering is we saw yesterday Steve Bannon was on Capitol Hill testifying or sort of refusing to answer some of their questions. But we do know that he also spent some time with Bob Mueller this week. And we know that Jared Kushner has been asked to submit more documents or look at his financial disclosure again. And I just want to get you one more time to explain to us, why does that activity continue if Rod Rosenstein comes to the podium today as the Deputy Attorney General, talks about these indictments and says pretty clearly that it was, if there was any connection, it was unwitting, or that there was nothing, that was there was no collusion, basically, is what he said.
Right. I mean, it goes back to the very broad auspices of the independent counsel in this case. Mueller's probe was not given a whole lot of obvious limits. It was kind of all things Russia. So the fact that they indict today for non-collusion Russian-based activity doesn't mean that there's not another indictment in the works or more things to be checked off before they decline to indict. So again, it's just too hard to know exactly where the model is between Rosenstein and Mueller as to how far that probe is going to go and how far it's going to be allowed to go.
All right. Well, you're our favorite trusty lawyer, James Trusty. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks. Good to see you.